I didn't plan to shut down a 200-person summer event. I just wanted my fence back. That's it. But somewhere between 3 missing fence planks and a bright orange extension cord snaking into my property like it owned the place, things escalated fast. And yeah, by the end of it, I was the guy who turned off the lights mid-party. Not metaphorically. I mean literally. Music cut, lights gone, catering trucks screaming in the dark, like someone hit the off switch on the entire illusion. So here's the setup. I live at the very end of a quiet street. Well, it used to be quiet. Somewhere I'll call Redwood Hollow, because the real name doesn't matter. What matters is my lot. Half an acre, kind of awkwardly shaped, wedged between a drainage easement and this open green space the HOA loves to pretend is their community event lawn. And listen, I'm not anti-HOA by default. I get the idea. Keep things tidy, maintain property values, blah blah. But when people start acting like your land is just an extension cord waiting to happen, that's when I have a problem. My yard? Nothing fancy. Cracked concrete path running from the back door to this old wooden shed. 2 big oak trees that have been slowly bullying the pavement for years, roots pushing everything out of place like they've got a personal vendetta. The shed itself, weathered, leaning just enough to make you question it, but still solid. And here's the thing. Underneath that shed wall, mounted clean and official, is a sub-panel. Not glamorous, not exciting, but important. Real important. I didn't even think much about it until last spring when I pulled some county permit records. Long story, just curiosity, and found out that this little sub-panel, it wasn't just feeding my shed. It had been approved years back to support temporary outdoor loads, specifically for the adjacent lawn, which, conveniently, the HOA uses every summer for their big community gala, or whatever they want to call it. String lights, live music, catered food, the whole Instagram-ready setup. And guess where all that power comes from? Yeah, my wall, my panel, my electricity. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Every year before this, they'd actually ask. Not politely, not warmly, but formally. Some letter, some form, some half-hearted, we appreciate your cooperation kind of deal. And I'd usually say yes, because honestly, it wasn't worth the fight. But this year, they didn't ask. Not a call, not a letter, not even a knock on the door pretending to be neighborly. Thursday afternoon, I come home, pull into my driveway, and something feels off immediately. You ever get that feeling where your brain notices something before you consciously do? Like a glitch in the scene. I walk toward the back, and there it is, 3 fence planks, just gone. Not broken, not fallen, removed. Clean. Intentional. Like someone made themselves a doorway. And then I see it. That orange cord. Thick, industrial, dragging through the dirt, cutting right through the gap in my fence like it belongs there, plugged straight into my sub-panel on the shed wall. No permission. No warning. Just installed. I just stood there for a second, trying to process the audacity of it. Like, this wasn't an accident. This wasn't confusion. This was someone deciding, yeah, we'll just take this. And right next to the panel, a bright yellow sticker slapped on the metal. Bold letters. Do not disconnect. Event in progress. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was insane. The confidence it takes to break into someone's property, hook into their power supply, and then leave a warning label for them. That's not just entitlement. That's strategy. That's someone betting you won't push back. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I documented everything. Took photos of the missing planks, the cord, the panel, the sticker, even the muddy boot prints leading in and out like they weren't even trying to hide it. Then I went inside, sat down, and started making calls. First stop, the county permit office. I kept it simple. Gave them my address. Asked about the sub-panel registration. They pulled it up in under a minute. Registered solely to your property. The woman said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. No shared access, no HOA clause, nothing. Just mine. Next call, a licensed electrician I've worked with before. I explain the situation in maybe 10 seconds, and he cuts me off halfway through and says, yeah, you can unplug that. That's your outlet. Took him 4 seconds to answer the only question that mattered. And that's when the situation shifted. Because now it wasn't about confusion anymore. It was about choice. They chose to cross that line. Now I had to decide what I was going to do about it. I didn't react immediately. That's the part people always get wrong. They think these moments are about anger, impulse, snapping back. But no, The real power move is patience. I waited. I thought it through. And then I made it official. Friday morning, I drafted a notice. Clear, direct, no emotional fluff. Unauthorized equipment connected to my private electrical panel will be disconnected at 5 p.m. Saturday. I included everything: timestamp, documentation, and a line that made it very clear any further entry without consent would be reported to the sheriff. Then I sent it certified mail. No ambiguity. No excuses later. And then I waited. Saturday rolled in warm, golden, almost annoyingly perfect. By late afternoon, I could hear it starting. The setup, the chatter, the clinking of equipment. By 6 p.m., the place looked like something out of a magazine. White string lights stretched across the lawn, glowing soft and inviting. Round tables covered in ivory linen. A quartet playing near this stone fountain like they were scoring the whole thing live. People dressed up, laughing, holding drinks, completely unaware of the fact that the entire scene was being powered by a panel they had no right to touch. And me? I was inside, watching the clock. For 58 p.m. For 59. And right at 5 o'clock, I stood up, walked out back, and headed toward the shed. Not rushed, not dramatic, just calm. Like I'd already made peace with what was about to happen. Because I had. I crouched down in front of the panel, reached for that orange cord, felt the tension in it. And for a split second, I thought, this is the moment where most people hesitate. Where they second guess, where they worry about what comes next. I didn't. I pulled the plug. And just like that, everything changed. Now before we jump back into the chaos, let's slow this down for a second, because what happened here isn't just drama. It's actually a textbook example of how people and systems overstep when they think no one's paying attention. According to standard procedure, HOAs don't actually have automatic rights to private property utilities, even if there's a history of informal cooperation. Past permission doesn't equal permanent access. And that's where things get slippery, because once you say yes a few times, people start treating it like a default instead of a favor. From a legal perspective, what they did crosses into unauthorized access, possibly even trespass and utility theft depending on the jurisdiction. That yellow "Do Not Disconnect" sticker? That wasn't authority. It was intimidation dressed up as authority. Big difference. And psychologically, this is where it gets interesting. This is a psychological trap. They weren't just taking power, they were testing boundaries. The broken fence, the confident setup, the warning label, all of it sends one message. We assume you won't challenge us. Because most people don't. Most people avoid conflict, especially against something that feels like an institution. And that's the real pivot point in this story. Not the cord, not the fence, but the decision to push back. The second that cord came loose, it wasn't loud, it wasn't explosive, there was no dramatic spark or cinematic boom. Just a quiet, almost polite click, and then the entire illusion folded in on itself. 1 second the lawn was glowing like a wedding catalog, the next, dark. Not dim dark. The string lights died in a ripple, like someone pulled the sunset out of the sky. The quartet cut off mid-note. Violin hanging in the air like it forgot what it was doing. The speakers went dead, and somewhere off to the side that catering truck let out this panicked electronic beep, like it knew something had just gone very, very wrong. And then silence. Not total silence. Not right away. More like confusion echoing through a crowd that didn't understand what just happened. You could hear it ripple, voices overlapping, chairs scraping, someone laughing nervously like this had to be part of the show. But it wasn't. And within maybe 10 seconds, that uneasy murmur turned into something sharper: frustration, irritation, the kind of energy that spreads fast when expectations collapse in real time. I didn't stick around to watch the full reaction. That's another thing people misunderstand. You don't need front row seats to your own move. I locked the gate behind me, walked back inside, and made coffee. Yeah, coffee. Because if you're going to pull the plug on a 200-person event, you might as well be calm about it. I sat there at my kitchen table, mug in hand, listening. You could hear everything from inside. The raised voices, the footsteps, someone trying to restart something that wasn't going to restart. And then, about maybe 20 minutes later, the knocking started. Not polite knocking either. Not, "Hey neighbor, quick question." No, this was sharp, controlled, deliberate. The kind of knock that says, "We're not asking." I opened the door, and there she was, the HOA president. Different name, same energy. I'll call her Karen, not because it's clever, but because it fits. Perfect posture, tight smile, eyes already calculating the argument before she even speaks. Behind her, you could see the glow of phone flashlights bouncing across the lawn, people trying to salvage whatever they could from the dark. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" she said, voice low but sharp, like she was trying to stay composed for the sake of appearances. And I just leaned against the doorframe, took a sip of coffee, and said, "Using my property." That hit her harder than I expected. Not because it was aggressive, but because it was simple. There's no angle to argue against something that basic. She tried anyway. Of course she did. "You've disrupted a scheduled community event," she snapped, stepping forward just enough to imply authority without actually crossing the threshold. This was approved, planned, and not by me. I cut in, still calm, still steady. And that's when the shift happened. You could see it in her face, that tiny recalibration when someone realizes they don't actually have control of the situation. So I reached inside, grabbed the envelope I had ready, and handed it to her. Printed, clean, no drama. She hesitated for a second before taking it, like she already knew she wasn't going to like what was inside. She opened it, scanned the page, and her expression went from irritation to disbelief. $900 unauthorized access fee, $200 panel inspection, $400 reconnection fee, she read out loud, each number sounding more offensive to her than the last. "You cannot be serious." "I am," I said, "and that's due before anything gets plugged back in." That's when the mask slipped. "This is outrageous," she said, louder now, the composure cracking just enough for the frustration to show through. "You're holding an entire event hostage over what? A misunderstanding." And I just shook my head a little. "No," I said, "this isn't a misunderstanding. This is you cutting through my fence, using my electricity, and telling me not to touch it." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she reached for something. Authority, leverage, anything she could use to flip the dynamic back in her favor. "You've cooperated in previous years," she said, like that settled the matter. And there it was. The assumption. The expectation dressed up as precedent. I set my coffee down on the small table by the door, reached into my pocket, and pulled out the certified mail receipt. Still crisp, timestamp clear as day. I handed it to her without a word. She looked at it, read the date, the time, and for the first time since she showed up, she didn't have anything to say. Because that's the thing. Once everything is documented, once the timeline is locked in, the conversation changes. It's no longer about opinions or tone or who's being reasonable. It's about facts. And facts don't negotiate. Behind her, the noise from the lawn was getting louder. People weren't just confused anymore. They were annoyed. Some were leaving. Others were pulling out phones, probably texting, probably posting. The kind of situation that turns into a PR problem real quick. And she knew it. "You're seriously going to let this event collapse over this?" she asked, quieter now, more controlled, but with an edge of desperation creeping in. I paused for a second, not because I needed to think, but because timing matters. "I gave you notice," I said. "Yesterday. Certified. Clear terms. You chose to ignore it." That landed. Hard. Because now the narrative wasn't unreasonable homeowner shuts down event. It was HOA ignored written notice and got caught. Big difference. She looked back at the lawn, then at the paper in her hand, then back at me. You could practically hear the calculation happening. Cost versus embarrassment, money versus control. And here's where it gets interesting, because this is the moment where most conflicts either explode or resolve. She exhaled, slow, controlled, like she was swallowing something she didn't want to swallow. "Fine," she said. "We'll handle this. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just damage control." I nodded once. "Payment first," I said. "Then we talk about reconnecting." She didn't argue again. That's how you know the fight is over. Not when someone agrees, but when they stop pushing. She turned, walked back toward the lawn, heels clicking against the pavement, posture still intact, but just a little stiffer than before. And I closed the door. That night, the event didn't recover. You can't rebuild atmosphere once it's gone. People lingered for a while, tried to make the best of it, but the energy was off. Too many interruptions, too much tension, not enough light, literally and figuratively. By 9 p.m., most of it had dissolved into small groups and early exits. Monday morning, the check arrived. No note, no explanation, just payment. Clean. Exact amount. And that told me everything I needed to know. But the Real resolution didn't come until Wednesday. That's when the HOA board reached out, not Karen this time, but the full board. Different tone, different approach. They weren't here to argue. They were here to negotiate. We sat down, neutral space, calm conversation, and for the first time, it actually felt like a discussion instead of a power play. They brought a proposal. I brought mine. And here's the thing. I wasn't interested in revenge. I wasn't trying to win in the emotional sense. I just wanted control over what was mine and clarity moving forward. So we worked it out, line by line. No assumptions, no gray areas. 30 days written notice for any future use of my property or utilities. Not a text, not a verbal heads up, written. An annual access fee, $1,800, paid up front in January. Not per event, not negotiable after the fact. And the key clause. Any equipment placed within 15 feet of my shed required my written approval. Not optional, not implied. Every detail spelled out. Every boundary defined. They signed it. All of them. And just like that, the dynamic changed. Because now it wasn't about who could push harder or assume more. It was about agreement. Structure. Respect, whether they liked it or not. And the funny part? They still had their events. The lights came back. The music played. The catering truck kept humming along every summer. From the outside, nothing really changed. But underneath it, everything did. Because they had the lawn. But I had the only outlet they could plug into. So yeah, on the surface, this story sounds like a petty neighborhood dispute that spiraled into a blackout and a bill. But if you zoom out a little, there's a lot more going on here than just a cord and a fence. Because what really played out wasn't about electricity, it was about boundaries. And more importantly, what happens when people get used to crossing them? The lesson here is most conflicts don't start with aggression, they start with assumption. Quiet, subtle, almost invisible at first. You say yes once, maybe twice, maybe every summer for a few years, and suddenly, that yes stops being a favor and starts becoming an expectation. And expectations, when left unchecked, have a way of turning into entitlement. Not always intentionally, not always maliciously, but consistently. And that's the first thing people underestimate. They think entitlement shows up loud and obvious, like someone banging on your door making demands. But more often, it looks like confidence. Like someone acting as if something is already agreed upon. Like a missing fence plank and a cord already plugged in before you even get home. This is a psychological trap. Because once something is already in motion, once the event is set up, the guests are arriving, the lights are on, the pressure shifts onto you. Now you're the one who has to decide whether to disrupt it. Now you're the one who feels like the problem if you say no. And that's exactly the position they were counting on. Most people fold right there. Not because they agree, but because they don't want the conflict. They don't want to be that neighbor. They don't want 200 people looking at them like they just ruined the night. And honestly, that's understandable. Social pressure is powerful. It's designed to keep things smooth, even when smooth isn't fair. But here's the flip side. When you avoid that discomfort, you don't eliminate the problem. You reinforce it. You teach people, whether they realize it or not, that your boundaries are flexible, negotiable, optional. And once that message is sent, it doesn't just apply to one situation, it becomes a pattern. From a legal perspective, what saved this entire situation wasn't the unplugging itself, it was everything that happened before it. The documentation, the certified notice, the clarity of ownership. Because without that, the story could have gone very differently. It could have turned into a dispute about miscommunication or shared understanding. But with that paper trail, there was no room for reinterpretation. According to standard procedure, if you're dealing with any kind of HOA, landlord, or shared community structure, the moment something crosses into your property or your utilities, you need to get it in writing. Not later, early, before emotions kick in, before assumptions solidify, because once something becomes normal, it's a lot harder to challenge. And here's something else that doesn't get talked about enough. You don't have to escalate emotionally to assert control. That's probably the biggest misconception. People think standing your ground means raising your voice, getting aggressive, making it personal. But in reality, the strongest position is usually the calmest one. Notice what didn't happen here. No shouting match, no threats, No dramatic confrontation in front of the crowd. Just clear steps, taken in order. Observe, document, notify, act. And that sequence matters more than people realize, because it shifts the narrative from conflict to process. And once you're operating from process, it's not about winning anymore. It's about alignment. Either the other side adjusts, or they face the consequences of not adjusting. But either way, it's not personal, it's structural. Now, let's talk about the HOA side for a second, because it's easy to paint them as the villain and move on. But that's not the full picture. Groups like that operate on momentum. They rely on consistency, on precedent, on things going the way they've always gone. And when something works, like having easy access to power, they build around it. They plan around it. They start to depend on it. So when that access suddenly disappears, it doesn't just feel inconvenient. It feels disruptive to the system they've built. And instead of questioning the foundation, most groups instinctively push back against the disruption. That's human nature. Protect the system first, analyze later. But that's exactly why boundaries matter. Because without them, systems expand until they hit resistance. And if there's no resistance, they don't stop. The lesson here is, you don't need to control everything. You don't need to win every interaction. But you do need to decide, very clearly, what is yours and what isn't up for negotiation. Not emotionally, not reactively, but intentionally. And once you decide that, you have to be willing to follow through. Not aggressively, not vindicatively, just consistently. Because consistency is what turns a boundary from a suggestion into a standard. That moment at 5 p.m., that wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about ruining an event or proving a point. It was about alignment. The action simply matched the notice. Nothing more, nothing less. And that's why it worked. Because in the end, people don't respect boundaries because you explain them well. They respect them because you enforce them consistently. So now I'm curious. If you were in that situation, standing there at 4:59 p.m., knowing exactly what was about to happen, would you have pulled the plug? Or would you have let it slide just one more time?